that's how you get around up in the Arctic. I'm not going to show the whole video there. It goes on for quite a while, but it gives you an idea of what it's like to ride a dog sled and how they train their dogs to pull them across the ice and snow. Now, you might be wondering, what types of food, what do the Inuit tend to hunt? Well, the Inuit tend to hunt for a couple of reasons. Probably the most important of which is that as a source of food. The Inuit diet is mostly meats. They eat a lot of different meats, and that's because there is not a lot of vegetables available up in the Arctic. It's too cold for a lot of plants to grow, so they rely mostly on eating meat to sustain themselves. However, some of you might not know this. If you're eating fresh meat actually contains some vitamin C, so that's why their biodata is still quite balanced. Down here, the reason why we have to eat a lot of vegetables is because our meat is less fresh. Up there, they often eat a lot of their meats raw, which still contains a lot of vitamin C, giving them a fairly balanced diet. Anyways, we're going to show another video here now, which is going to show you some of the foods that the Inuit like to eat.
Here in Rankin Inlet, majority of the population consists of Inuits. Inuits are the Aboriginal people of the North American Arctic.
The Inuits and their ancestors were the first Arctic people to become experts at hunting seals, walrus, whales, bowhead whales, and caribou. Darlene and I were honored to feast with the community and try traditional foods.
Meat is traditionally eaten frozen and raw. However, some meals are cooked, such as caribou stew and bannock. Note to self, if you were ever invited to a feast, bring an ulu. This all-purpose knife is used for skinning and cleaning animals and is used to prepare and cut food.
We tried narwhal, beluga whale, caribou, which can be served frozen, roasted, fried, or stewed, Arctic char, bannock, and pipsy.
We had visitors from the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls come to Rankin Inlet. This feast was in honor of the families and survivors of violence. There is so much history, Inuit traditions, pain, healing, and resilience in this community. Derek and I hope to understand and also bring awareness to our family and friends.
There you have it, folks. A glimpse of the Northern experience. There is so much more to eat, and I hope one day you can try this.
As the video showed you earlier, they were using a knife known as an ulu to cut the meat to eat. This is an example of what an ulu knife looks like. And it's made from metal. The blade's made from metal, but the handle is made from usually bone or wood. Now, the wood they would get from scavenging from trees and driftwood that they find up in the Arctic. But for bone, that's they would get from the animals they hunted. You see, the Inuit are very, very resourceful. They don't waste any part of animals that they hunt. They use every part of every animal that they hunt to produce something. The meat is usually consumed for food. The fat is melted down to make oil, and the bones are used to make various objects like the handles of an ulu knife or the tips of arrows, harpoons, that sort of thing. Bone is also used to make this object here, which is known as the snow goggle. Now, some of you might be wondering, what exactly is this? It's a goggle that you wear over your eyes here. If you look at it closely here, you can see a slit cut in the middle of it. And this is worn to protect the person's eyes from the reflection of the sun out in the Arctic. You see, the Arctic, especially even in the summer, there's a lot of snow and ice everywhere. And so as the sun shines, all that sunlight bounces off the snow and ice and reflects upwards, which can be very damaging to a person's eyes. And so you have to wear some kind of eye protection to prevent your eyes from being damaged, and they create these snow goggles which have a slit that is narrow enough to prevent light from getting in, but still wide enough for you to look through so you can see where you're going. The same idea as what these are. These are modern-day ski goggles, which you wear when you go up to the mountain to go skiing or snowboarding. And you have these goggles here because, one, to protect your eyes so that, things don't get into your eyes, but more importantly, to prevent the sunlight from reflecting off the snow to damage eyesight, which is why ski goggles are often tinted either a red or, like this one here, tinted an orange color. And I also want to show you and talk to you about the typical type of house that the Inuit will live in, especially in the winter times, and that is the igloo. It is a building built entirely out of snow and ice. And snow itself is a great insulator, so it keeps the cold air from penetrating into the inside, and so it keeps people actually relatively warm living inside an igloo in the Arctic. Now, igloos are built with these big blocks of snow, which they cut from the ground, and they stack up, usually in a spiral-like shape to keep it from collapsing. But it's hard for me to explain without a video, so here you go, another video on how an igloo is built.
With night approaching, temperatures plummet. A shelter, an igloo, can be built out of nothing but snow. It has to be the right kind of snow, cut from a wind-packed snowdrift. The best snow is laid down in one single stone. It's hard and compact. This is an ancient skill which has been passed down from generation to generation. A boy's first igloo is never easy. He must learn by watching and copying his father. And by making mistakes. Working with snow is a special skill. Only with snow that's hard and dry can the blocks be the right size and shape. The snow blocks will curve upwards, each designed to fit closely to its neighbor. Two Inuit can build an igloo in 30 minutes. In a storm, that could mean the difference between life and death. The final blocks must fit well, or the whole igloo could collapse.
The snow house is a great design. Daylight can shine through, but the cold wind is kept out. Finally, Andrew shows Apak how to cut overhangs between the layers of blocks, so that any melting snow will drip away.
Malapit na sa September.
Ilan na ba tayo?
April,
May,
June,
Once the
July,
stove is going
August,
inside,
September.
it can be really warm, several degrees above freezing.
Excited ka na mag-school? No? See that?
As the video showed you there, it's built with wind-drift snow, as the narrator there mentioned. And it's usually stacked in this spiral shape here to form a dome, which is particularly strong in withstanding the wind. As you know, a dome shape is, architecturally speaking, it has a lot of weight, so it can deal with the intense blizzards that can happen up in the Arctic and still keep the people inside it really safe. Now, an igloo can be quite spacious. There are different types of igloo. The one that was shown in the video, that was an emergency igloo. It's built just to shelter a family for one evening. But igloos can also be big permanent buildings as well, semi-permanent buildings that are built to last the entire winter. Here we have an example of such an igloo. It's much bigger, and some igloos have different rooms as well. You can have more than one structure put together, and it can look like this on the inside. You can see there's a bed in here. You can see there's a shelf on the other side. It's every bit the same as a house that you and I would live in down here in the southern part of Canada. Now, the last thing I want to talk about from the Arctic is this. This is called a nukshuk. It's what the Inuit build up in the Arctic for a couple of reasons. It is used mostly for navigation. And nukshuks function with the same intention as what we have down here as road signs to tell you where to go. If you look at the picture on the left-hand side there, you see a large structure with two legs, and then there's a hole in the middle of the chest of that statue there. What you would do is you would climb. If you're going from one place to another place, you would climb up, look through that hole in the middle, find the next nukshuk in the distance, and then you would walk in that direction. That's how you get to where you want to go. The legs, though, are there for another feature. They're big enough so that a human being can actually hide inside in between the legs of the structure. And so what they're for is, let's say you're a traveler, you're going from one place to another up in the Arctic, and you suddenly get caught in a storm, which can happen in the Arctic because of the climate, a sudden storm. The nukshuk also provides you with shelter so that you can survive a storm before continuing on your journey. And the Inuit have a tradition of hiding food at the bottom of a nukshuk just so that travelers will have access to food and shelter as they go along the way. If they get caught in the storm, of course, it is up to the traveler to replenish the food before you actually leave and go on to your next destination. All right, so now we're going to move on to the final segment of our program this morning, and we're going to talk about the St. Rock, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a ship we have inside the museum. We've talked about the animals so far. We've talked about the Inuit. Now we're going to talk about the police officers that were up there in the 1940s. Now here is a picture of the St. Rock. The St. Rock was a ship that was built in Vancouver over 90 years ago in 1928, and the original purpose of this ship was to serve as a floating police station up in the Arctic. You see, in the 1920s, Canada didn't really have much police presence up in the Arctic, and so they needed to find a way to send police officers up north, and what they did was decide to build a boat that can sail into the Arctic and stay up there over the course of the winter, serving as a floating police station, and from there they'll be dispatched to various Arctic communities on dogs to patrol and give some government support. And then that was what it did for the first, 10 years of its service life. And then in 1940, it was sent to travel through something known as a Northwest Passage to get to Halifax. It was dispatched from Vancouver to go up north, travel through the Arctic and come on the other side to sail all the way down to Halifax, Nova Scotia. Nobody really knows why this mission happened. It was a mission that was happening as part of the Second World War. And all the documentation surrounding that is classified, so we might never know why this secret mission happened. But we do know it forced the ship to complete the Northwest Passage, sail through the Arctic, making it only the second ship ever to actually complete that journey. And then 1944, it sailed back to Vancouver, where it then sailed back to Halifax again, this time going down south through the Panama Canal, making it the very first ship to circumnavigate all of North America. So the St. Rock is quite an important ship for us Canadians. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to take you on board a virtual tour of the ship. The ship is located inside the Vancouver Maritime Museum today. As you can see on the photograph on your right-hand side, that's what it looks like now. It's sitting inside the museum, and it's located inside that triangular-shaped building you see on the left. It's actually, that building was built specifically to cover the ship. Anyways, let me just give me 1 second here. I'm going to bring up the tour, and we're going to go on a bit of an adventure. All right, welcome on board the St. Rock. This is our 3D map of the ship here, and I'm going to take you through a tour of the vessel. And we're going to start over here. We're going to go all the way to the upper deck of the ship, and we're going to start up here. So back here, we're going to start at the stern of the ship. the first thing you probably notice are these two boats here, these two small rowboats. Now, yes, they are lifeboats. They're used if there was a disaster on the ship, if you abandoned ship, you would use one of these boats to get the people off safely. That's one purpose of these boats. But these boats also serve as ferries to and from the ship. You see, if you look out the window here, at the back of the museum, if you look out the window here, you'll notice that there are a bunch of ships out here, a bunch of boats out here that are not moving, and that's because they've dropped anchor into the water. And the people on board these ships, they're not docked to a dock, and so the only way they can get on shore is if they take a smaller rowboat and paddle the way to shore, and that is exactly what these boats were used for most of the time. You see, up in the Arctic, the water is very shallow, far too shallow for a big ship like the St. Rock to come up close to a lot of land areas. And so they would have to drop anchor out in the open water and lower one of these boats into the water so that the police officers can actually get on shore. So that's what these boats are used for most of the time. If we look over here, I want to bring everybody's attention to this tube right here. This brass tube right here, because I'm going to talk about it in a few seconds from now. So let's come back over here. Just remember that brass tube. We're going to go inside the wheelhouse, which is where the captain steers the ship. So welcome to the St. Rock's wheelhouse, which is right over here. The first thing I want to point out to all of you is, if you look out the windows here, the view is not very good. You can't really see much. If there was a rock right beside the ship or a big iceberg, you probably won't be able to see it. And so you're probably wondering, if you can't see obstacles around the ship, how can you see the ship from here? Well, that is where the brass tube comes in. You see, if you go back outside here, steering the ship was a big job, and it wasn't easy at all. It would involve 3 people. First of all, there's going to be one person standing all the way up here in the crow's nest, keeping watch, where you have a much better view of everything going on. And that person will then communicate with someone standing on top of the wheelhouse up here on the flying bridge using hand signals to signal where obstacles are in the way. And then the person standing there would then tell the captain where to go through that brass tube I showed you earlier, because that tube is a speaking tube. You're talking to it, the sound travels through the tube, comes out the other side so the captain can talk to the individual. And that's how you steer the ship. Now, if you look around the wheelhouse here, we have another speaking tube right here that goes down below deck. That goes all the way to the engine of the ship, which is very important, because if you look around here, you don't see any controls. And that's because the engine cannot be controlled from the wheelhouse over here. You see, when you're driving a car, if you want to go fast, you step on the gas pedal. If you want to slow down, you step on the brake pedal. On the ship, on the other hand, there's no controls down here. The only way to make the ship go faster or slower is to lift up the flap on that speaking tube and tell the engineer down below, I want to go faster, I want to go slower. Now, if we turn around here, we see some interesting objects, pieces of fabric stored on the shelf right here. These are signal flags, and they're used for communication. So let's look at it over here. We'll bring you back over here. There's a chart on the desk here. That is a chart for signal flags. If you look closely at it, you can see each flag corresponds to a certain letter of the alphabet or a certain number. And so what these flags are used for is communication. You can string this flag up in a certain way, and you can spell messages and talk to people on other ships or talk to people on shore. And it's very useful in instances where your electronics are not working. So, for instance, your radio is broken or your generator is broken, you can't use electronics to communicate. These flags are available for you to continue to signal to other ships what you need to communicate with them. In fact, this system is still very much in use today. Sailors all have to know how to use signal flags to communicate with each other. And so this, the practice of using signal flags is very much still alive and well now. Now, below that little image here, we have signal flags, is another thing we have on the desk, and that, of course, is a nautical chart. It looks like a map, but it's not a map. It is a nautical chart. And the difference between a map and a chart is this. A map tells you information about what exists on land. A chart tells you information about the water. Given that this is a ship, a chart is what you need in order to navigate in the water. If you look closely at this image here, if you look at the areas which is land, there's not a lot of information about the land at all. But if you look over the water, you see numbers, you see lines. This tells you information you need to know about the water. It tells you how deep the water is. It tells you where it's shallow. It tells you the areas that are exposed in high and low tide or submerged in high tide. It tells you the current, which direction the water is flowing. So all things you need to know in order to sail a ship. All right, let's come over here. I'm going to go down below deck now to the main deck of the ship. And we're going to start by coming here to the foredeck.
Look at that.
So here, welcome to the foredeck of the ship. We have a statue of the captain of the ship. His name is Henry Larson. We'll talk a lot more about him over the course of the day. Now, if you look to his right, you see a dog sled over here, as well as a husky dog. Now, this is a sled dog, one of Henry Larson's dogs he kept on the ship. Now, I'm going to ask a question for all of you. I want you to think of the answer again. You won't be able to answer live because I have all of you muted right now, but I want you to think of the answer. They had sled dogs on board the ship. How many dogs do you think they kept on board the ship? I'll give you all a few seconds to think of your answer, and I'm going to share the answer with you in a second.
12.
Now, they had 2 dog sleds on board the ship, and to operate those 2 dog sleds, they had to keep 17 dogs on board the ship. 17! And they needed 17 dogs because it took 8 dogs for one sled, and you have 17 dogs so that you can go on a rotation. You have 8 dogs, 1 extra dog, so that 1 dog gets a day off every day.
24.
Which is good because it's important for dogs to rest as well. Now, the ship's not very big, so the dogs had to live somewhere, and they actually lived just right here on the deck of the ship. And that's normal. A lot of ships back then, you would have animals living on the deck, but when animals live on the deck of the ship, you might wonder, where do these animals go to the bathroom? Well, if you're thinking right here on the deck, you are correct. They would just go to the washroom right here on the deck, just like animals do when they go outside. And that's also quite normal for most ships. When you have animals living on the deck of the ship, when they go to the washroom, you take out a bucket of water and a mop, you throw some water on the deck, you clean up the deck, and you're good to go. But this is an Arctic ship, meaning it's very, very cold up in the Arctic. And so when the animal goes to the washroom, it freezes onto the deck right away, making quite a difficult mess to clean up. So you can't use a regular bucket of water and a mop to clean it up. Instead, you have to use this object here. We nicknamed it the Holy Stone. And it's basically a rock on the end of a stick, and what the sailors would do is actually pick it up and scrape the deck really hard every single day to clean up after these animals. Now, you might be wondering, how much time do you spend every day scraping the deck? On average, a sailor would spend 4 to 5 hours each day cleaning the deck. That's how dirty it was to have 17 dogs on board the ship. But they needed to because that's the only way to get around. These are police officers after all, and the dog sled was basically the equivalent to the police car that they would use today. All right, on that note, we're going to go down below deck now to an area of the ship known as the forecastle. So welcome to the forecastle of the ship. This is the area that the regular crew members of the ship stayed. Now, forecastle is a funny looking word. It's short for forecastle, forward castle. Forward because it's at the front of the ship or the bow of the ship. And castle because, well, the crew members, they like to call the area they lived in a castle because it sounded cool. So we look around here. We have 8 bunk beds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so if you thought 8 people lived in here, you are correct. This is a space for 8 crew members of the ship to live in. And it is not a very big space at all. It's very, very tight. And the guys out on board the ship, they're big guys, so there was not a lot of space at all. And this wasn't just their bedroom. This was their home. This was their house. They did everything here. So, of course, they would sleep here, but as you can see, they would also eat here. You got tins of canned food and stuff out here. They would also do their laundry here, wash their laundry, as well as to take their showers in here. Now, you might be wondering, I don't see a washroom in here. How could you take a shower? Well, what they would use is this big bucket you see on the floor here. You would stand in that bucket, and you would have your friend fill a little tin can full of water. They would pour the water on top of your head, and you would wash yourself off that way. That's how you took your shower. And you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, that's gross. Everybody would see you. Well, all the crew members on board the ship were men back in the day. And so, it would be no different than saying going to a swimming pool and going to the men's change room where you have open showers. That's pretty much how it was like to be a sailor back in the day. You had to be very comfortable with each other. It's all guys in here, they would help each other with tasks like this. Now, they didn't like to take showers very often for two reasons. One, it was very, very cold on board the ship. Yes, you see here, there is a coal furnace, but the coal furnace could not keep the ship too warm because of the amount of condensation it would cause. If you've gone to a swimming pool before, you go inside a swimming pool, you might notice that in a steam room that one of the windows is going to be very, very wet and the other side of the window is very dry, and that is caused because of the condensation due to the temperature difference inside and outside the steam room. Well, in the Arctic, it's minus 50 degrees Celsius outside in the winter, and inside, even if it is only about 5, 6, 7 degrees, it is going to cause a lot of condensation to develop. And so they kept the temperatures very low, just above freezing, to prevent that from happening. And so it's very uncomfortable to take a shower out in such cold temperatures, so they didn't do it very often at all. The other reason is, in order to take a shower, you needed fresh water, and getting fresh water in the Arctic is difficult. The entire Arctic is an ocean, right? And so, for the most part, everything is salt water. Even all the ice is salt water. So you had to travel quite far away from your ship in order to find fresh water. And so it took a lot of effort to get fresh water. And when they did have fresh water, they would tend to save it for drinking and not use it for showering. That also means, because they did not have a lot of fresh water, that they did not do their laundry very often either. And so they didn't, if you don't do laundry very often, you often also definitely would run out of clean clothes to change into. And here's a fun little fact for all of you to take away from this program this morning. This will give you an idea of how hard it was to be a sailor back in the day. How often do you think they got to change their underwear? This is because they didn't get to do laundry, right? So how often do you think they would change their underwear? Again, I want all of you to think of your answer, and I will share the actual answer with you in a couple seconds from now. So normally I would get guesses like a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. The answer is they would change their underwear on average once every 3 months. And you think that's gross? That's because it is very gross. You don't get to change it. You change your underwear once every 3 months. You change your underwear every day. They change it once every 3 months because they could not get to do laundry. And so it was very hard to be a sailor back in the day. And that's the folks. So now we're going to go down even further below deck to the cargo hold. This is where you would store all of your goods when you're out at sea. Over here, I want to show you, take your attention to this area here. There are a lot of tools. You see a saw here. You see some picks here, some shovels. These are the tools you use to deal with the ice surrounding the ship. So you see, up in the Arctic, there's ice everywhere, especially closer to the winter months. And when the ship is trying to sail through, it can often get stuck in the ice. And what they would actually have to do is the crew would have to get off the ship and actually use the ice pick to chip away at the ice around your ship to break it free so that you're able to continue sailing. That's what these tools are here for. You go further around, you see that the hull of the ship have these big wooden beams going across it. These are ice beams that give the hull some added structure so that it can withstand the pressure of the ice around the ship so that the ship doesn't get damaged by the icebergs. Now around here, this is the cargo hold, so this is where the crew would store all the diesel fuel that they would need to use when they're out in the Arctic, as well as all the food that they would consume during their journey. And some of the things you probably recognize today, you have canned peas, canned tomatoes, corn, you have dried eggs, which they still serve in cafeterias now. Let's see, what else do you have? You've got lemon juice, lime juice, and of course, my favorite here, I'm sure all of you recognize what this is. It's Coca-Cola. Yes, they had Coca-Cola even back then. It was 1940s. They had Coca-Cola, and they brought some Coke with them as a treat once in a while. And with that, we're going to enter the engine room, which is right over here. This is the St. Rock's engine room, and this is the massive diesel engine that powered the ship. This is a huge, huge engine, a 6-cylinder diesel engine here, but controlling it is actually quite difficult. As I mentioned before, you would have an engineer working down here. This is where the engineer was set. And if the captain wants to go faster or slower, the captain would tell the engineer what to do through the speaking tube you see right here. And once the engineer hears, let's say the captain wants to go in reverse, the engineer will say, all right, I got to turn the ship in reverse. You got to get up, come over here, and work on the controls here to bring the ship to go in reverse, which is actually very, very difficult. You see, when you're driving a car, if you're going forwards, if you want to go backwards, you stop the car, you shift it into reverse, so you can go backwards, and that's because your car has something known as a transmission, and you can shift gears so your car can go backwards. Well, the ship does not have a transmission, and so if you want to go backwards, what you actually have to do is turn the engine off, stop the engine, and then start it again, running it in the opposite direction. And that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work. This engine relies on air. You press air to start. There's the tank right there. That tank can hold enough air for you to try to start the engine 2 times. And sometimes you start the engine, it doesn't start going the right way, so you got to turn it off again and try again. If you don't get it right in 2 tries, well, you could be in a lot of trouble because you might not be able to get the ship to go in the direction that you want to go in. Now, if you come up here, we have a big room full of batteries. Now, these batteries here are all to power one device, this device, which is something known as a gyroscopic compass. You see, down here in Vancouver, if you take out a regular magnetic compass, you can always find which way is pointed north. That's normal. That's not a problem at all. However, up in the Arctic, because it's so close to the magnetic North Pole, you're unable to use a regular magnetic compass. It's very hard it won't function properly, just spin around in a circle because it's detecting the magnetic field. It's too close to the magnetic north. So you need something called a gyrocompass, which is what we have right here, and that consumes a lot of electricity, hence why you need all those batteries. All right, on that note, we're going to climb back up out of here to the quarter deck of the ship. Here we are at the back of the ship, the stern of the ship. And a couple things I want to show you. The staircase that we came out of earlier, that used to be where the bathroom was located. Of course, the bathroom's not there anymore because after the ship was brought to the museum, we had to create an emergency exit. So we took away the bathroom and put a staircase there instead so that people could get on and off the ship quicker. That said, that is where the bathroom used to be located, and it was the most uncomfortable bathroom ever to have been built in the world, and that's because it is just a hole that dropped directly into the ocean. It doesn't flush. And so if you're sitting on it going to the washroom, every time the ship went up and down, the cold Arctic water would shoot through the hole and give your bum a little wash. So it's very uncomfortable and nobody liked to use it. The sailors would prefer to use a bucket and throw it overboard instead. Now, if we turn around over here, we have some funny objects I want to share with you. Here we have a little object at the end of a long rope. That is something known as a ship's log, and it is used to calculate the speed of a ship. what you would do is you would throw it off the back of the ship. It would start spinning, which pulls the rope into the water. The rope would have a bunch of knots tied into it, and you would count the number of knots that pass through your hand over a given amount of time to help you figure out your speed. And that's why speed on board a ship is calculated in knots. All right, everyone, I know it's been quite the long tour. We're almost done. We're into the officers' cabins now, and a few more things I want to show you. This is where the higher-ranking officers on board the ship got to stay when they're out on their journey. And up here, these cabins are significantly nicer than the folks that the regular crew members stayed in. This is the radio operator's cabin. You can see he's got his own bed, his own little room, his own privacy, he has a desk to work on. And so it's significantly more luxurious in here than it was in the forecastle. And over here we have the galley, the kitchen, where the cook got to work and prepare a lot of the food for the crew members to eat. Now, this is the 1940s, and so they had access to quite a selection of food. You've got some canned foods over here, canned corn. You've got canned tomato juice for them to drink. You also have canned milk powder, which we still have today. But one of the cans that we probably don't see very often today is this one here. This is a canned chicken, a whole chicken in a can, which is a source of protein for them. But apparently it is absolutely disgusting. When you pour the chicken out, the chicken looked more like jello than it did meat. So it's quite difficult and quite gross to eat. But of course, it wasn't just canned foods that they ate. They had a kitchen over here, so they were able to cook foods as well. And one of the foods that the cook was known for making on a relatively regular basis was donuts. A lot of you probably might be aware of the stereotype that police officers like to eat donuts, or at least here in North America, they do, and it is actually true. These police officers ate donuts almost every single day. They claimed that it was they needed to eat the donuts because it was so cold in the Arctic that the sugar in the donuts helped them stay warm because of the extra energy that they got from eating the sugar. But I think it's just because they like to eat donuts. Now, some of you may or may not know the answer to this, but does anybody know why there's a hole inside a donut? Well, if you don't know why there's a hole in there, I'm going to tell you. It is to do with how donuts used to be made. Donuts are basically rings of dough deep fried in oil. Now, to make it so that you don't burn your fingers and it's easy to prepare, what the people started to do at the very beginning was make donuts with a hole in it, run a string through the middle so you can hold onto the end of the string and dip everything into the hot oil to deep fry it and pull it out without burning your fingers. That's what the hole in the donut is actually for. Now let's come around this way over here. We're going to go to two more rooms. This here is the library on the ship. It's more of a multi-purpose room than a library. There are not that many books here, but this is where the crew members got to go to relax, spend time, and do a lot of stuff. Yes, they would read in here, of course, but they would also do other things. You see on the table here, there is a sewing machine. Sailors have to be very good at sewing because when you're out at sea, especially for 2 or 3 years at a time, if you rip your clothes, you damage your clothes, you kind of have to know how to fix it yourself. But more importantly, you had to learn how to fix the sails of your ship. You see, the St. Rock had an engine but also had sails, and sails, especially in high winds, tend to rip and get damaged, and you need to know how to sew in order to repair them so that you can continue on your way. And so sailors had to be very good at sewing as well. Now, the last room I want to show you is this room here. This is the cabin of Captain Henry Larson. It is by far the nicest cabin. You can see he has one desk as well as a second folding desk here. He's got a bench in here. He's got his own bed. He lived in quite a bit of opulence compared to the rest of the crew members. But the funny thing is, if you look at his door, his title says Staff Sergeant Henry A. Larson. It doesn't say Captain Larson. I wonder why. Well, the reason is this. He was a captain on board the ship. He was in charge of the ship. There's no question about it. But he was also a police officer, and his official rank in the police force was Staff Sergeant, not Captain. And so we have to refer to him as Staff Sergeant Henry A. Larson, and it comes in official capacity as opposed to calling him Captain Larson. with that, we're going to exit the cabins and we're going to talk about one last thing. Over here, we see a tent.
Oh,
A tent is not a very big tent.
it's
And in this tent was an Inuit family that traveled on board the ship when it voyaged from Halifax back to Vancouver in 1944. Now, this tent's not very big. If you look at it today, you'd say that you can fit no more than 2 people in it at most. But believe it or not, a family of 7 people lived inside this tent. Now, this family came along to help guide the ship back to Vancouver. This part I want you to listen carefully to because it does reveal just how important it is to work together up in the Arctic. The first time the St. Rock journey from Vancouver to Halifax, it took the ship 2.5 years up the Arctic to get to Halifax. When it got to Halifax, it did some repairs, went to a major refit, and had to sail back to Vancouver. But this time, Captain Larson thought, maybe I should ask the Inuit family to come along for the journey because they're experts on living in the Arctic and how to survive in the Arctic and navigate the Arctic. So maybe their knowledge would be able to help us get home a little bit faster. So they invited the Inuit family to come aboard, which they stayed here on the deck of the ship. And they helped guide the ship back. Now, how long do you think it took for them to get back to Vancouver with the help of the Inuit guiding the ship? It took 2.5 years without their help. How long do you think it took with their help? Make a guess, and then I'll share the answer with you in a second. So it took 2.5 years to do it without their help. With the help of the Inuit, they were able to complete the journey in just 86 days. So less than 3 months. So 2.5 years down to less than 3 months with the help of the Inuit. So what does that tell you? If you don't know how to do something, you should always ask for help. And with that note, that brings me to an end to my tour of the St. Rock. We're right on time at 11:30, and I'm going to let all of you unmute yourselves so that if you have questions, please feel free to ask.
I have a question.
Yes, what's your question?
I forgot.
I forgot. Oh my goodness.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
I didn't even put it if there was something above them.
Just a minute. Meron pa silang question.
Sorry, I
Like
couldn't hear your
a
question.
roof or something. Like a roof or something. Like why would they put a tent?
That's because the Inuit actually preferred to live in the tent. They were actually given opportunities to live in the cabins with the rest of the crew. They tried it for one night. They didn't like it very much. They actually asked to live in the tent because that's where they're used to. They're used to living outside.
How did they make the donuts with the ingredients? Did they have the ingredients?
Yeah, they had flour, they had eggs and stuff on board that they could use to make almost anything. They had a fully functioning kitchen on board, a galley on board. So that allowed them to make a lot of those items.
Why are there black squares?
Sayang ka malikot. Ang likot mo naman,
A black square in the middle? Oh, that's because I'm looking at the chat box and seeing if there are any questions from all of you right now.
When will the video? When will this end?
Why do black teachers?
Sorry?
I have a question too. I have a question too.
Yeah, go ahead. You can ask your question.
Me? Why I see something upstairs by the black square? I see something flying on the air on the black square. Why I see the black square is like here and something is like this.
The black square was just the check box.
Teacher, why I see like this flying like the black square? It is standing on top the black square. What is that thing? My square see something standing on the black square.
That's me.
Oh my god.
Oh my god!
answer.
Let me quickly change your background first.
Okay, and I think you know Kian from Shabnam Solar, the screen. He has also a question, Dennis, if you can answer. Kian, go ahead. Say your
Alright, the flags are also another thing. Also, the flags when another ships of police come to have a war.
get the question, Dennis?
Now, what's the question? I already told you. And what is a one versus nothing?
I don't quite get your question.
I have a question.
I think you're asking me about what the St. Rock is doing during the Second World War?
No, when another fleet comes and
Guys, one by one. Brian, can you read?
flags to help them to know what police countries are here to now have the war to attack.
During the Second World War?
No, police also get a war by two ships and they put a flag so they could know what country they are.
Okay. Can you ask your mom to write the question on chat and then mute yourself, please? So the next, who else has a question? You know? You know?
Yeah.
So you go ahead.
How many years does it take to make the boat? To build the boat?
The boat was built in about 2 years. It started construction, I believe, in 1926. It was finished by 1928.
Oh.
Thank you. So who else has a question? Anybody else?
Me.
Okay, just a moment. Everybody, please mute yourself. Put your hands up. I will call you. So, Derek, can you say your question?